He walked into the club like he owned the city. And to be fair, Ronan Vale actually did. He thought the waitress trembling with the tray of expensive whiskey was just another fearful civilian. He saw a pretty face. He didn't see the calluses on her knuckles. He didn't know that years ago she was the most feared featherweight in the underground circuit. He challenged her to a fight for his own amusement, expecting a slap. What he got was a war. This is the story of the Don who fell in love with the woman who broke his jaw. The neon sign above the Velvet Haven flickered with an irritating buzzing sound that only Elara Kane seemed to hear. Rain was hammering against the blackened windows, and her feet felt like they were bleeding inside her cheap, non-slip service shoes. Elara adjusted her apron, keeping her head down. The rule of survival she had lived by for years was simple. Be invisible. Table 4 needs a refresh. The floor manager, a sweaty man named Thorne, hissed as he walked by. And fix your hair, you look like you just woke up. Elara grit her teeth, her jaw tightening, a reflex she couldn't quite kill. On it. She picked up the heavy crystal decanter of premium cognac. It cost more than her rent. She moved through the smoky lounge, navigating between velvet armchairs and men in suits that cost more than her car. This was the stomping ground of the outfit, the high-end criminals who wanted to drink in peace. She approached table 4. The air around the booth felt heavier, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. Sitting in the center was Ronan Vale. Everyone knew the name. Even if you didn't watch the news, you felt the name. He was the youngest capo in the city's history, having taken over the north side after his father's untimely heart attack. He was devastatingly handsome in a terrifying way. Sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of burnt espresso, and a tailored suit that fit his broad shoulders like armor. He wasn't talking. He was just watching the room while his 2 associates, hulking men named Harlan and Garrick, laughed loudly at a joke. Elara took a breath. Pour. Smile. Leave. More cognac, gentlemen, she asked, her voice rasping slightly. Ronan shifted his gaze to her. It felt like a physical weight. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her hands. Elara instinctively curled her fingers inward to hide the scarred knuckles, the telltale signs of a life she had buried. You're shaking, Ronan said. His voice was low, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. It's a heavy bottle, sir, Elara lied. Or maybe you're clumsy, Harlan sneered, reaching out and grabbing Elara's wrist. It was a violation, a sudden breach of her space. In her old life, Harlan would be unconscious before he finished the sentence. A check hook to the temple, a pivot, and good night. But this was Elara, the waitress. Please let go, she said quietly. Harlan, behave, Ronan said lazily, not actually caring. He reached for his glass. Harlan laughed and jerked her arm. Physics took over. The heavy crystal bottle slipped from her other hand. Time seemed to slow down. Elara watched the amber liquid arc through the air. The bottle didn't break, but the cognac, thousands of dollars of it, splashed directly onto the lap of Ronan Vale's slate-gray suit. The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. The music in the club didn't stop, but table 4 became a vacuum of sound. Ronan slowly looked down at his ruined trousers. He looked back up at Elara. Harlan stood up so fast his chair knocked over. You stupid! Do you know who this is? Elara stepped back, her heart hammering a familiar rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. Fight or flight. I'm so sorry, she stammered, forcing herself to play the role. I'll get towels. Sit down, Harlan, Ronan commanded. He stood up, towering over Elara. He wiped a hand down his jacket, smelling the alcohol. That's a waste of a good vintage, Ronan said, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and danger. Thorne! The manager materialized instantly, pale and sweating. "Mr. Vale, I'm so sorry. She's new. She's an idiot. I'll fire her immediately. Put the suit on the club's tab, please." "I don't care about the bill," Ronan said, his eyes locking onto Elara's. There was something in her eyes that annoyed him. She wasn't crying. Waitresses usually cried when they ruined his clothes. She was calculating. "She looks like she has an attitude problem," Ronan noted coolly. "Look at her stance." Elara realized her mistake. She had shifted her feet, left foot forward, right foot back at an angle, the stance of an orthodox fighter ready to throw a jab. She quickly squared her hips, trying to look submissive. "I'm sorry, sir," she repeated. "Are you?" Ronan stepped closer, looking down his nose at her. He was arrogant, used to people folding. He wanted to see her break. "You spilled a drink because you have no discipline. My man touches your wrist and you panic." "He grabbed me," Elara said, her voice hardening. Ronan raised an eyebrow. "And I don't like being touched." The challenge hung in the air. Thorne looked like he was going to pass out. Ronan chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "You have fire, misplaced, but fire." He looked around the club, bored. He wanted entertainment. "Thorne, clear the floor." "Sir?" "You heard me. Clear the tables in the center." Ronan unbuttoned his soaked suit jacket and tossed it to Garrick. He rolled up his pristine white sleeves, revealing forearms thick with muscle. "Mr. Vale, you can't be serious," Thorne squeaked. "She thinks she's tough," Ronan said, loosening his tie. "She stands like she's ready to swing, so let's see it." He looked at Elara with a predator's grin. "1 round. Just me and you. If you can land a single hand on my face, I'll pay for your college tuition or whatever charity case you are. If you don't, you leave this city tonight." "I'm not fighting you," Elara said, gripping her serving tray. "Then Harlan breaks your legs for ruining my suit," Ronan said simply. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "Choose, sweetheart, the hospital or a sparring match." Elara looked at Harlan. He was cracking his knuckles, eager for violence. She looked at Ronan. He was treating this like a game, a joke. He thought he was going to humiliate a waitress to blow off steam. She sighed, a long, weary exhale. She set the serving tray down on table 4. "Okay," Elara said. The tremor in her voice was gone. "Okay." Ronan smirked. "Brave little thing." Elara reached up and pulled the hair tie from her wrist, tying her messy brown waves back into a tight, severe bun. She unbuttoned her vest and tossed it aside, leaving her in a black t-shirt and slacks. She walked to the center of the cleared floor. The patrons were whispering, phones coming out to record the execution. Ronan strolled into the center, hands down by his sides, chin up. The ultimate disrespect. "Come on then, give me your best shot. I promise I won't hit back too hard." Elara looked at his chin. It was high, exposed. God, I hate arrogant men, she thought. The atmosphere in the Velvet Haven shifted from luxury lounge to coliseum. The rich and corrupt circled the perimeter, swirling their scotches, eager to watch the dawn toy with the help. Ronan Vale bounced lightly on the balls of his expensive loafers. He had trained in Krav Maga and boxed at his private gym. He wasn't a professional, but he was big, strong, and fast. He expected the girl to flail, maybe try a slap, which he would catch, laugh at, and then dismiss her. "Waiting on you, sweetheart," Ronan taunted, extending his arms wide. Elara stood still. She didn't bounce. She didn't raise her fists yet. She just breathed. In through the nose, out through the nose. She analyzed him. Weight, heavyweight. Reach, long. Stance, amateur, too wide. Center of gravity, too high. Ego, massive. "You said 1 round," Elara said calmly. "Does the round end when a bell rings or when you hit the floor?" The crowd gasped. Ronan's eyes narrowed. The amusement vanished, replaced by a cold irritation. "Cute!" "Come here." He lunged. It was a feint, a quick step forward to make her flinch. Elara didn't blink. She didn't move an inch. Ronan paused, confused by her lack of reaction. "Are you broken?" He threw a lazy left jab, aiming for her shoulder just to push her back. Elara moved. It wasn't a scramble. It was a slip. She dropped her right shoulder, millimeters, letting his fist sail harmlessly past her ear. In the same motion, she pivoted on her lead foot. She was now inside his guard. Ronan's eyes widened. He realized too late that the distance had closed. Elara fired a left hook to the body. She pulled it. She didn't want to rupture his liver, just wake him up. Even at half power, the sound was wet and heavy. Thud. Ronan gasped, the air rushing out of his lungs. He stumbled back, clutching his side. The room went dead silent. Harlan dropped his glass. "You," Ronan wheezed, his face flushing red with rage and embarrassment. "You little—" The game was over. The predator was now the one being hunted. Ronan roared and swung a heavy right cross, intending to take her head off. No more playing. Elara saw it coming a mile away. She ducked under the swing, the wind of his fist ruffling her baby hairs. She came up on his blind side. Pop, pop. A double jab to his nose. Fast, surgical. Ronan's head snapped back. Blood instantly began to stream from his nostrils, staining his white shirt crimson. He staggered, his vision watering. He was a street fighter, a brawler. When hurt, he got angry. He rushed her, trying to use his weight to tackle her. Elara didn't retreat. She utilized the matador defense. She stepped to the side, hooked his arm as he charged past, and used his own momentum to spin him. She shoved him in the back. Ronan Vale, the Don of the North Side, tripped over his own feet and crashed face first into a velvet armchair, knocking it over. He lay there for a second, groaning, blood dripping onto the carpet. Elara stood in the center of the room, her hands raised in a perfect Philly shell defense, chin tucked. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was Elara the Blade Kane, the woman who had vanished from the pro circuit years ago after a scandal in New York. Ronan pushed himself up. He wiped the blood from his lip and looked at it. Then he looked at her. He should have been furious. He should have ordered Harlan and Garrick to shoot her. But as he looked at her, sweaty, fierce, eyes burning with a cold blue intensity, something twisted in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was total, consuming fascination. "Who are you?" he rasped, standing up. He held up a hand to stop his bodyguards who were drawing their weapons. "Stand down." "I'm the girl you just fired," Elara said. She realized the gravity of what she had done. She had just humiliated a Mafia boss in front of his peers. She had signed her own death warrant. The adrenaline crashed. Fear flooded back in. I have to go," she whispered. She turned and bolted. She sprinted past the stunned manager, through the kitchen doors, slipping past the chefs, and out into the rainy alleyway. "Get her!" Harlan yelled from inside. "No!" Ronan's voice roared from the lounge. "Let her go!" Inside the club, Ronan accepted a towel from a terrified server. He pressed it to his bleeding nose, watching the kitchen doors swing shut. "Boss," Garrick said, stepping up nervously. "You want us to find her and handle it?" Ronan looked at the blood on the towel. He smiled. It was a terrifying, bloody smile. "Find her," Ronan said. "But if you touch a hair on her head, I will kill you myself. Find out where she lives. Find out who taught her to slip a jab like that." "What are you going to do?" Garrick asked. Ronan picked up his ruined cognac glass. "She owes me a drink, and she owes me a rematch." Elara ran until her lungs burned. She didn't stop at her apartment. That was the first place they would look. She went to the only place she felt safe, a 24-hour gym in the gritty South Side called Steel Forge. The smell of old sweat, leather, and liniment oil calmed her instantly. The owner, an ex-heavyweight named Pops Harlan, was mopping the floor. "You look like you saw a ghost, kid," Pops grunted, not looking up. "Worse," Elara panted, leaning against a punching bag. "I punched him already." Pops stopped mopping. He looked at her, his face pale. "You did what?" He challenged me. I couldn't help it, Pops. Muscle memory. She slid down the bag to sit on the floor, burying her face in her hands. I have to leave town tonight. If I go to Philly, maybe I can... You can't go to Philly, Pops said, his voice grave. The commission is still looking for you there. And if you go to New York, the Russians will find you. Elara Kane was trapped. Years ago, she was the rising star of the welterweight division, but her father, a gambling addict, had bet against her in a championship fight. Now he begged her to take a dive. She refused. She won by knockout in the first round. The people her father owed money to, the Russian Bratva, killed him that night, and they put a price on Elara's head for costing them millions. That's why she was a waitress in Chicago. That's why she was invisible. And now she had just exposed herself to the Italian Mafia. I'm dead, she whispered. I'm actually dead. Meanwhile, in the penthouse of the Vale Tower, Ronan sat in a leather chair, an ice pack on his nose. Across from him sat his head of intelligence, a hacker named Silas, a rare exception to his no outsiders rule. Her name is fake, Silas said, typing on a laptop. The social security number she gave the club belongs to a woman who died long ago. No digital footprint before years ago. She's a ghost. She's not a ghost, Ronan touched his bruised rib. She hits too hard to be a ghost. Look at the security footage again. They watched the fight on the large screen, frame by frame. Look at that pivot, Ronan pointed. That's not self-defense class, that's pro-classic Philly style. Look for female boxers, welterweight, active years ago, East Coast. Silas typed furiously. A few minutes later, he stopped. He hit a key, and an image popped up on the screen. It was a promotional poster for a fight in a major arena. Elara the Blade Kane versus Lila. Got her, Silas said. Elara Kane, undefeated, vanished after her father was murdered by the Russian Bratva in New York. Ronan leaned forward, the pain in his ribs forgotten. So she's running from the Russians. Looks like it. There's an open contract on her, $500,000. Ronan stared at the photo of Elara. In the picture, she looked fierce, untouchable, just like she looked tonight before she ran. The Russians want her dead, Ronan mused. He took a sip of whiskey. Cancel the contract. Silas blinked. Boss, we can't cancel a Bratva contract. No. Ronan stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. But we can buy it out, or we can make it clear that she is under my protection. Why? Silas asked. She humiliated you. Ronan touched his swelling lip. She's the first person in years who didn't look at me with fear. She looked at me like a target. He turned back to Silas. I have the underground tournament coming up against the Triads for the Harbor territory. My fighter just failed a drug test. Silas's eyes widened. You want her to fight the beast? I want her to fight for me, Ronan said. Find her. Don't hurt her. Bring her to me if she refuses. Ronan smiled. Tell her I know where she sleeps, and tell her the Russians are coming to Chicago. The rain hadn't stopped. It washed over the grimy windows of Steel Forge Gym like a veil of static. Elara was halfway through packing her duffel bag when the front door chime rang. It wasn't the usual light jingle. It was the sound of something heavy being forced open. Pop stood up from his desk, reaching for the sawed-off shotgun he kept under the counter. Pops, don't! Elara whispered, catching the movement from the corner of her eye. Two men in charcoal overcoats stepped inside. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence alone drained the oxygen from the room. They were followed by a third man, Ronan Vale. He looked different without the suit jacket. He wore a black turtleneck that emphasized his height. His nose was bandaged, and his eyes were fixed on Elara with a terrifying intensity. Nice gym, Ronan said, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal ceiling. He looked at a faded poster of a young Pops Harlan, a bit out of the way for a girl who used to headline the arena. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. The duffel bag slipped from her hand, hitting the rubber mat with a dull thud. "How did you find me?" "You're a professional athlete, Elara. You have a specific look when you move. It took my man minutes to find your real name." Ronan walked toward her, stopping just outside her striking range. He wasn't a fool. "And it took another few to find out why you're hiding in a dump like this. If you're here to kill me, just get it over with," Elara said, her chin lifting. "But let Pops go. He has nothing to do with this." Ronan chuckled, and for the first time, it didn't sound entirely cruel. "I don't kill people who can give me a lead hook like that. It would be a waste of talent." He pulled a thin manila folder from under his arm and tossed it onto a nearby massage table. "The Russian Bratva has a bounty on your head. Apparently, you cost them a lot of money in New York." "I didn't take the dive," she snapped. "I know, that's why I like you." Ronan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous silk. "But here's the problem. The Russos have a cell in Chicago. They saw the videos tonight. Everyone has. You can't go to the police, and you can't run. Not with their reach." Elara felt the walls closing in. The invisible life she had built was a house of cards, and Ronan Vale had just blown it down. "What do you want, Ronan?" "I want a winner," he said. "Every few years, the three major families, the Italians, the Triads, and the Irish, hold a tournament. It's called the Summit. It's underground. No gloves, no rounds. Just a fight until someone quits or can't get up. The winner gets control of the Chicago shipping docks." "You want me to fight for the Mafia?" Elara laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "I'm a boxer, not a gladiator. My fighter, a slab of meat named the Crusher, just got caught with enough steroids in his system to kill a horse. He's out. The tournament is soon. If I don't have a fighter, I lose the docks. If I lose the docks, my board of directors starts wondering if I'm fit to lead." Ronan leaned in, his scent, sandalwood and expensive rain, filling her senses. "Win the tournament for me, Elara. In exchange, I buy out your contract with the Russians. I make you a ghost they can never find. I give you a new identity, $1 million in a blind trust, and a one-way ticket to anywhere in the world." Elara looked at Pops. The old man looked heartbroken. She looked back at Ronan. "And if I lose?" "If you lose," Ronan said, his eyes darkening, "I can't protect you. The Russians will have you, and I'll have lost the city. We both die, in a manner of speaking." "You're asking me to gamble my life on your pride," Elara whispered. "I'm asking you to gamble on yourself," Ronan corrected. He reached out, his thumb grazing her jawline, the spot where he'd intended to strike her earlier. "You were the best, Elara. Don't tell me you don't miss the lights. Don't tell me you don't want to show these animals what a real technician looks like." Elara looked at his hand. She could break his wrist in seconds, but she could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man who recognized a kindred spirit. They were both fighters. They were both trapped by their legacies. "No rounds?" Elara asked. Ronan's lips quirked into a smirk. "No rounds. Just the finish." Elara took a deep breath. She looked at the ring in the center of the gym, the place where she felt most alive and most cursed. "I need a sparring partner," she said. Ronan unbuttoned his cuffs. "I think I know someone who owes you a rematch." The hours were a blur of violence and preparation. Ronan didn't take her to a fancy hotel. He took her to his private estate, a fortress of glass and steel nestled in the woods outside the city. The training was brutal. Ronan wasn't just a boss, he was a fanatic. He spent hours in the private gym with her, holding the pads, his arms vibrating from the force of her strikes. He watched her move with a hunger that wasn't just sexual. It was an obsession with her perfection. "Higher," he grunted, holding the mitts for a head kick. "The Triad fighter, Kai, is a kickboxer. He'll try to chop your legs. You have to stay mobile." Elara delivered a roundhouse that cracked against the leather like a whip. She was dripping sweat, her black sports bra soaked. "I know how to fight kickboxers, Ronan. You worry about the betting odds." Ronan dropped the pads and grabbed a towel, wiping his face. He watched her shadow box in the mirror. She was poetry in motion, lethal, precise, beautiful. "The odds are against you," Ronan said quietly. "A woman has never fought in the summit. They think I've lost my mind. They think I'm sending a lamb to the slaughter." Elara stopped. She turned to him, her chest heaving. "Is that what you think?" Ronan walked over to her. The tension between them was no longer just about the fight. It was the proximity of two predators in a small cage. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I think you're the most dangerous thing I've ever invited into my home," he whispered. He leaned in, and for a moment, the world stopped. He kissed her, not with the arrogance of a Don, but with the desperation of a man who had finally found his match. It tasted of salt and adrenaline. Elara didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands finding the corded muscles of his back. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. "Win this, Elara. Not for the money, for me." "I don't win for men," she breathed, her eyes fierce. "I win because I don't know how to do anything else." The night of the tournament arrived. The venue was a hollowed-out cathedral in the industrial district, lit by flickering torches and the glow of high-stakes gamblers' tablets. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and cheap blood. Ronan led her through the bowels of the building. She was wrapped in a silk robe with the Vale crest, a golden lion on the back. Her hands were taped. Her mind a cold, empty room. "Vale," a voice boomed. A man with a scarred face and a Russian accent stepped out of the shadows. It was Victor Russo, the man who had ordered the hit on her father. Elara's heart stopped, then began to beat with a murderous rhythm. "I hear you found a new pet, Ronan." Victor sneered, looking Elara up and down. "She looks familiar. Is this the little girl who ran away from New York?" Ronan stepped in front of Elara, his hand resting on the holstered gun at his hip. "She's not a pet, Victor. She's the woman who's going to take your territory." Victor laughed. "She won't survive the first minutes with Kai, and when she dies, I'm taking my pound of flesh from her corpse." Ronan didn't blink. "You can try, but remember, Victor, in this city, I'm the one who decides who gets buried." They moved into the arena. The crowd roared, a wall of sound that would have terrified a normal person. In the center was a raised wooden platform. No ropes, no padding. Kai was already there. He was a mountain of a man, his shins scarred from years of kicking bamboo trees, his eyes cold and vacant. Ronan turned to Elara. He grabbed her by the back of the neck, pulling her close. "The world is watching." "Show them why they call you the Blade." Elara shed the robe. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat. They saw the scars, the muscle, the absolute calm of a woman who had walked through hell and liked the temperature. She stepped onto the platform. The bell, a heavy iron gong, struck once. Kai didn't wait. He launched a devastating leg kick that would have snapped a normal person's femur. Elara checked it with her shin, the bone-on-bone contact echoing through the cathedral. The fight was on. The sound of shin bone colliding with thigh muscle cracked through the cavernous cathedral like a gunshot. It was a wet, sickening thud that made the front row of high-stakes gamblers wince, spilling champagne onto their bespoke tuxedos. Elara Kane didn't scream. She didn't have the breath for it. She swallowed the agony, tasting copper, and circled to her right. Her left leg, the target of Kai's relentless assault, felt heavy and foreign, as if it belonged to a corpse rather than a living fighter. It was going numb, the nerve damage setting in with terrifying speed. Kai, the triad champion, was not a brawler. He was a machine built of gristle and conditioned bone. He didn't fight with anger. He fought with a cold, terrifying mathematics. He knew that Elara was a boxer, a specialist in head movement and rapid-fire punching. So he did what any intelligent predator would do. He took away her foundation. He chopped at her legs with the rhythmic precision of a lumberjack felling an oak tree. Thwack! Another low kick slammed into the exact same spot, just above her knee. Elara's leg buckled. She barely managed to stay upright, her vision swimming with white spots of pain. "Stop dancing, little girl!" A voice screeched from the VIP balcony, tearing through the haze of combat. Elara looked up for a fraction of a second. Victor Russo was leaning over the wrought iron railing, his face twisted into a mask of drunken cruelty. He swirled a glass of vodka, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of her destruction. "Die like your father," Victor roared, his laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Do it for the family." That name, that memory, it should have broken her. For years, the mention of her father had been enough to send her into a spiral of guilt and fear. It was the ghost that had chased her from New York to Chicago, the shadow that had forced her to become a waitress, a nobody, a ghost. But tonight, in the blood-scented air of the cathedral, the ghost didn't bring fear. It brought clarity. It was a spark landing in a room full of gasoline. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp rage that slowed time down to a crawl. Elara turned her attention back to Kai. The pain in her leg didn't disappear. Pain never disappears. But it drifted into the background, becoming just another piece of data to be managed. She stopped trying to retreat. Retreating was what got you killed against a kicker. She stood her ground. She watched Kai's chest. Most fighters watch the hands or the eyes, but the eyes lied, and the hands were distractions. The chest never lied. Before a limb could move, the core had to engage. Kai shifted his weight. He was loading up. He saw her limping, saw the damage, and decided it was time for the execution. He was going to throw the high kick, the headhunter. It was the strike that had put his last opponents into comas. Elara saw his pectoral muscle twitch, a micro-tell, a fraction of a second warning. There, Kai launched the kick. The power is greatest. Instead, she did the kick is where the power is greatest. Instead, she did the unthinkable. She stepped in. She dropped her level. The wind of his shin rustling the loose strands of hair on top of her head as it sailed harmlessly over her. By stepping forward, she jammed his range, moving past the danger zone and entering the pocket. The pocket was a phone booth. It was intimate. It was claustrophobic. It was where boxers went to work. Kai's eyes widened. For the first time, the machine looked confused. He was on one leg, off balance, and his target was now inches from his chest. Elara didn't hesitate. She unleashed years of frustration, fear, and hiding in a single fluid combination. Strike one, the liver shot. Elara pivoted her hips, digging her left shovel hook deep into the right side of Kai's body, just below the floating ribs. It wasn't a flashy punch, it was surgical. The liver is the body's filter, a dense organ filled with nerves. When struck correctly, the brain forces the body to shut down to protect it. It is the great equalizer. Thud. The sound was dull and heavy. Kai's mouth opened in a silent scream as his nervous system crashed. Strike two, the uppercut. As Kai's head dropped forward from the body shot, Elara fired a right uppercut. It threaded the needle of his guard, snapping his head back, jarring the brain inside the skull. Strike three, the check hook. Elara pivoted out to the side, throwing a short left hook to his temple as she exited the pocket. It was over before the sound of the punches caught up to the visuals. The giant swayed for a heartbeat. It looked like he might stay standing simply out of spite. But physiology is not a negotiation. Kai's legs turned to water. He collapsed, first to his knees, and then face first onto the wooden planks, gasping for air that his paralyzed diaphragm refused to give him. The cathedral went dead silent. Elara stood over him, her chest heaving, her fists still raised. She looked down at the man who had been trying to end her. She could finish it. In the underground, a stomp to the neck was legal. The crowd, recovering from their shock, began to bay for it. They wanted blood. They wanted a fatality. Elara looked up at the balcony. She locked eyes with Ronan Vale. The Don of the North Side was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't cheering like the others. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at her with an intensity that burned hotter than the torches lining the walls. He was waiting to see who she was. Was she a killer? Or was she a queen? Elara stepped back. She lowered her hands. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the stale air, and shook her head. She refused to be the animal they wanted her to be. "He's done," Elara announced, her voice raspy but cutting through the noise. The referee, a nervous triad lieutenant, looked down at Kai. The fighter was curling into a fetal position, vomiting bile onto the floor. "Winner!" the referee shouted, his voice cracking. "The blade!" The room exploded. The tension broke. Money changed hands, groans of lost bets mixing with the cheers of the Italian faction. The Vale soldiers began to clap, a thunderous sound of approval, but the celebration lasted seconds. "No." The scream came from the balcony, shrill and hysterical. Victor Russo smashed his vodka glass against the railing, raining shards of crystal down onto the floor below. His face was purple, veins bulging in his neck. "This is not over," Victor shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the platform. "You do not humiliate me. That woman belongs to me. She is my property." The madness in his eyes was absolute. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, violent crack. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the rear of the cathedral slammed shut. The latching sound echoed like a prison cell closing. From the shadows of the choir loft and the side confessionals, movement erupted, men emerged. They weren't wearing the slick suits of the gamblers. They wore heavy wool coats and tactical gear. In unison, the metallic clack, clack, clack of submachine guns being racked filled the hall. The Russian Bratva hadn't come to watch a sporting event. They had come to stage a massacre. "I don't care about the rules of the summit." Victor roared, spitting over the rail. "Kill her! Kill Vale! Kill them all! Burn this place to the ground!" Panic, instant and primal, seized the crowd. The wealthiest criminals in Chicago screamed and scrambled, diving under pews, overturning tables, desperate to find cover from the impending hail of bullets. Elara stood alone on the raised wooden platform. She was the highest point in the room. There was no cover, no ropes, no place to hide. She was exhausted, her leg was useless, and she was staring down the barrels of automatic weapons. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but strangely, she didn't move. She couldn't. She looked at Ronan. He stood in the center of the chaos, just below the platform. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't reached for the gun at his hip. He wasn't looking at the Russians, and he wasn't looking for cover. He was looking up at her. And, terrified as she was, Elara noticed something that froze her blood. Ronan Vale was smiling. Elara froze. Her lungs were burning from the fight, her leg throbbing with a dull, rhythmic agony, but the physical pain vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, absolute certainty of death. She stood exposed on the raised wooden platform, a spotlighted target for submachine guns. She didn't look at the gunman. She looked at Ronan. He stood below the platform, his back to her, facing the balcony where Victor Russo screamed in a spray of spit and vodka. Ronan wasn't reaching for a weapon. He wasn't diving for cover. He was adjusting the cuff link on his left wrist, his movements precise, almost bored. Click. The sound was small, metallic, and pathetic against the vast silence of the cathedral. Click, clack, click, click. A wave of confusion rippled through the Russian ranks. Men looked down at their weapons, racking the slides furiously. The sound of dry firing pins striking empty chambers echoed like hail on a tin roof. There was no thunder. There was no muzzle flash, just the embarrassing mechanical sound of failure. Victor Russo's face shifted from triumphant rage to a pale, slack-jawed horror. He squeezed the trigger of his own pistol, aiming directly at Ronan's heart. Click. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire would have been. It was the silence of a predator realizing it had walked into a trap. Ronan reached into the pocket of his trousers. He moved slowly, theatrically, letting every eye in the room follow his hand. He pulled out a small silver object, a firing pin. He tossed it into the air, the metal catching the light of the flickering torches, and caught it with a casual snatch of his hand. "You're a predictable man, Victor," Ronan called out. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the rafters, amplified by the sudden vacuum of sound. "I knew you couldn't resist a public execution. It's your signature. That's why I invited you. That's why I let you bring your guard." You invited your death," Victor stammered, his voice cracking. "My men. Your men are holding pounds of useless scrap metal," Ronan interrupted, his tone dipping into a dangerous, icy calm. "My armorer visited the cloakroom while your security team was distracted, watching the pretty girl fight in the ring. You really should background check the coat check staff, Victor. My man Garrick makes a terrible butler. He spills everything, but he is an artist when it comes to disassembly." The realization washed over Victor slowly, a dawning nightmare. He looked around the room. The triads were standing back, arms crossed, watching with impassive amusement. The Irish delegates were drinking their whiskey, unbothered. Victor was alone. "Now," Ronan said, taking a step toward the balcony. The sound of his dress shoe on the stone floor was sharp and authoritative. "You threatened my fighter. You insulted my family. You disrupted the sanctity of the summit." Ronan paused. He looked up at Elara. She was still standing on the platform, her chest heaving, sweat causing the silk robe to cling to her battered frame. Blood from a cut above her eyebrow traced a line down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She looked wild, majestic, terrifying. "And you killed the father of the woman I intend to keep." Ronan finished, the words ringing with a finality that made the Russian recoil. Ronan nodded once to the shadows. "Harlan, Garrick, clear the trash." The doors to the sacristy burst open. The Italian security team flooded the room, but they didn't come in shooting. They didn't need to. They moved with the efficiency of a riot squad, tackling the confused and unarmed Russians, zip-tying wrists and dragging them toward the rear exits. It wasn't a battle. It was janitorial work. The Russians, stripped of their power and their weapons, were nothing but frightened men in expensive coats. Victor Russo was not dragged out. Two of Ronan's largest enforcers hauled him down the stairs from the VIP balcony. He kicked and screamed, his dignity stripping away with every step, until they threw him onto the floor at the base of the fighting platform. Ronan ignored him. He walked up the wooden steps to the platform, his eyes locked on Elara. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood cologne and the faint metallic scent of adrenaline on him. He took off his tuxedo jacket, the silk warm from his body, and draped it over her shoulders. His hands lingered for a moment on her arms, grounding her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. Elara let out a shaky breath, the adrenaline crash beginning to set in. Her hands were trembling. "I think I broke a rib," she murmured, wincing as she pulled the jacket tighter. "I'll buy you a new one," Ronan said softly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Then his expression hardened as he turned her to face the floor below. "He's yours, Elara. Your father's debt is paid. But if you want closure, real closure, you take it." Elara looked down. Victor Russo was on his knees, blood dripping from a broken nose onto his pristine white shirt. He looked up at her, and for the first time in years, Elara didn't see a monster. She saw a pathetic, small man who had used money to buy fear. "Elara," Victor wheezed, holding up a shaking hand. Please, it was business. Just business. I can pay you. Double the contract. Triple." Elara stared at him. She remembered the phone call years ago. She remembered the funeral. She remembered the endless nights sleeping in her car, terrified of every shadow. She looked at Ronan. "Give me your gun." Ronan didn't hesitate. He pulled the pistol from his shoulder holster. He checked the safety, flipped it off, and handed it to her, handle first. The weapon was heavy, warm, and deadly. Elara weighed the gun in her hand. The grip was rough against her taped palms. She walked down the steps, her movement slow and limping, until she stood feet from Victor. She raised the gun. She aimed it directly at the center of his forehead. The entire cathedral held its breath. The triads stopped drinking. Harlan stopped dragging a guard. Even the dust motes seemed to hang suspended in time. Victor squeezed his eyes shut and began to sob. Elara's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. Just a few pounds of pressure, and the nightmare would be over. The ghost would be exorcised. But as she looked at him cowering, sobbing into the stone floor, she realized something. Killing him wouldn't fix her father, and killing him wouldn't make her free. It would just make her like him. She shifted her aim inches to the left. Bang! The gunshot was deafening. The bullet smashed into the stone floor, inches from Victor's knee, sending chips of granite flying. Victor screamed, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, checking his body for holes, hyperventilating in terror. "I'm not a murderer," Elara said, her voice cold, flat, and echoing with absolute power. "I'm a fighter. Killing you is too easy, Victor. I want you to live. I want you to wake up every morning in whatever hole you crawl into, knowing that a girl, a waitress, beat you." She turned to Ronan, handing the gun back to him. Her eyes were clear. "He leaves the city tonight. If he comes back, if I even hear his name whispered in Chicago, I won't miss next time." Ronan took the gun, holstering it with a fluid motion. He looked at her with a profound, terrifying pride. It was the look of a man who had just realized he wasn't looking at a subordinate, but an equal. "You heard the lady," Ronan said to his men. "Get him out of my sight. Put him on a boat to nowhere." As Victor was dragged away, weeping, the reality of the night settled in. The triad leader, an elderly man with a cane, walked past the platform. He paused, looked at Ronan, and nodded respectfully. Then he looked at Elara and bowed low and deep. The docks belonged to the Vales. The war was over. The cathedral emptied slowly until only the echoes remained. "You have your docks," Elara said, her voice raspy. She leaned against the wooden post of the platform, the adrenaline finally leaving her legs. "And the Russians are gone, so I guess this is it." Ronan stood in front of her. The arrogance that usually defined him was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "This is it," he agreed. "The plane is fueled at the airport. It's a luxury jet. The pilot is waiting. There is money in a blind trust in Switzerland. You can go to Paris, Tokyo, the Maldives. You can be whoever you want to be. You can be invisible again, but this time in luxury." Elara looked toward the massive oak doors of the cathedral. Beyond them lay the rain, the night, and the world. Freedom, safety, a life where she never had to tape her hands again, a life where she never had to look over her shoulder. Then she looked back at Ronan. She saw the man who had stood in the line of fire for her. She saw the man who had bet his entire empire on her right hook when everyone else laughed. She saw the loneliness behind the power, the same loneliness that had haunted her for years. "The thing about being invisible," Elara said slowly, stepping off the platform and walking toward him, wincing slightly as her bruised leg took her weight, "is that it gets incredibly lonely." Ronan held his breath. He didn't move to touch her, as if afraid she might vanish if he reached out. "Elara?" She stopped inches from him. She reached out, her taped hand grabbing the lapels of his ruined shirt, and she pulled him down. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision. It tasted of salt, iron, and victory. It was the sealing of a pact, darker than blood and stronger than any contract. Ronan's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly, pulling her flush against him as if he were trying to merge their souls. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Elara smirked. Her lip was swollen, her eye was bruising, but she had never looked more beautiful. "Cancel the flight," she whispered against his lips. "I hear the North Side needs a new enforcer, and I'm very expensive." Ronan laughed, a genuine, joyous sound that filled the empty church. "I think I can afford you." Later, the Velvet Haven had been reborn. The flickering neon sign was gone, replaced by tasteful golden Art Deco lettering. The floors were polished marble, and the air smelled of fresh lilies and old money. It was a busy night, and the lounge was packed. At a corner booth, a man in an ill-fitting suit snapped his fingers aggressively at a passing server. "Hey, sweetheart!" The man barked, his face flushed with too much whiskey. "I've been waiting for my drink. Hurry it up or I'm talking to the owner." The young waitress flinched, looking terrified. Before she could apologize, a shadow fell over the table. The man looked up. Standing there was Ronan Vale. He looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, but his eyes were hard. "Is there a problem here?" Ronan asked, his voice pleasant, but carrying an undercurrent of threat. "Yeah, there's a problem." The drunk man sneered, emboldened by alcohol. "The service is trash. Who runs this place anyway?" Ronan didn't answer. He simply stepped aside. Standing next to him was a woman. She wore a tailored black tuxedo suit that was cut to perfection, hugging an athletic frame that radiated power. Her hair was down, cascading in waves, but her eyes were sharp, calculating and utterly fearless. Diamond earrings caught the light, matching the heavy platinum ring on her finger. She rested one hand on the table. Her knuckles were smooth now, healed, but the way she stood, balanced, weight on the balls of her feet, was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. "I run this place," Elara said. Her voice was silk wrapped around steel. "And I don't like people who snap their fingers at my staff." The drunk man blinked. He looked from Ronan, the king of Chicago, to the woman standing beside him. He saw the way Ronan looked at her, not with protection, but with deference. He realized too late that he wasn't talking to a manager. He was talking to the queen. I'm sorry," the man stammered, shrinking back into the leather booth. "I didn't know." "Now you do," Elara said, leaning in slightly. A predatory smile curved her lips. "Drink your drink, pay your tab, and leave a generous tip before I decide to make you wear the glass." The man gulped, nodding furiously. Elara straightened up, brushing a piece of invisible lint from her lapel. She turned to Ronan, who was watching her with undisguised adoration. "Shall we?" she asked, offering him her arm. "After you, boss," Ronan grinned. They walked through the crowded lounge together, moving in perfect sync. Heads turned. Whispers followed them. They were the Vales. He had the empire. She had the knockout punch. And together, they were absolutely untouchable. And that is how the waitress became the queen. From spilling an expensive bottle of cognac to ruling the Chicago underground, Elara proved that sometimes the hardest fights are the ones outside the ring. What did you think of Elara's choice? Should she have taken the money and run to Paris, or did she make the right call staying with Ronan? I want to hear your theories in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It helps us create more high-quality series like this. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss next week's saga, the billionaire's fake fiancé who was actually an FBI agent. You don't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and stay dangerous.